The last section of chapter 4 is about homeostasis. And really, this whole chapter is kind of an introduction to the rest of the year. We have our tissues, we now have organ systems, and we've gotten an overview of those different systems. But ultimately, we have to come back and think about how do we maintain homeostasis? How do we keep our internal environment constant? And it turns out our nervous system and endocrine systems play a really key role in this. And one thing we need to keep in mind is changes from our normal tolerance limits often can result in illness or even death. So we really want to keep this homeostasis constant. So how does the body do this? Well, there's two key mechanisms for maintaining homeostasis. Negative feedback is defined as saying the output of the system resolves or corrects the original stimulus. And positive feedback brings about an increasing change in the same direction as the original stimulus. And I always felt like those definitions are a little confusing. So I want to go through some examples so that we can have a better understanding of this. In negative feedback, you've got a primary mechanism, and the output of the system dampens the original stimulus. There typically are two components. We have a sensor and then a control center. So I want you to think about your furnace. So let's say that you set the temperature at 72 degrees, and that's what we want to keep it at. And it's a really cold day. In fact, it's so cold that the temperature gets too low, and that becomes a stimulus. A sensor recognizes that it's too cold. We have a thermometer that recognizes the temperature. That's sent to the control center, which says, hey, that's too cold. And it turns the furnace on. And the furnace starts producing heat. And the heat will raise the temperature until it's not too cold anymore. And now the stimulus is removed. There's no reason for this to be turned on. So it actually causes the control center to stop producing heat. In turn, if it gets too hot, there's a stimulus, a sensor, a control center that says, hey, it's too hot in here. Air conditioner kicks on, cooling things off until it returns back to its homeostasis. It self-corrects. You can think about this in your own body. If you get too cold, you start shivering. Your control center in your brain is going to kick in everything it can to try to preserve your body heat. You're going to want to go someplace warmer. You'll shiver to produce more heat in your muscles. You will start to draw your blood into the core of your body so that you're keeping most of your heat in the center. On the other hand, if you become too warm, you start sweating, you start directing your blood out to the surface of your bodies so that you can have the evaporative cooling from the sweat, cool your bloodstream off a little bit. And again, we have this control center that's directing the effect. And we tend to hover right around that nice, happy homeostasis. Here you're seeing that shown a little bit more clearly. We've got a stimulus. We are getting too warm. The sensor hits your brain. Control center says, hey, we need to have blood vessels dilate, sweat glands secrete sweat, and then eventually we cool back off again and it turns off the stimulus, the sweat reduces. Same thing happens here. If you get too cold, sensor hits to the control center. It directs blood vessels to constrict, sweat glands are inactive, shivering may occur, returning you back to your normal state. This is negative feedback. Most of the things in your body work this way. If you have too much water, you get rid of that water, kicks the stimulus back off. Positive feedback, on the other hand, is a completely different situation, and it's not as common, but it will lead to the release of something. So, for example, birth is a positive feedback. At some point, the baby gets large enough that it's going to push against the uterus. And enough of that pressure will get in there that it will cause the body to release a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin contracts the uterus, which causes more pressure on the uterus, which causes more oxytocin to be released, which causes more pressure, which causes more oxytocin, which causes more pressure, which causes more oxytocin. And so this effect gets more and more intense. This is why when you see someone in labor, early on, they're going, well, I think I'm having some cramping. I'm not sure. Maybe it's time. And as that labor continues, the cramping and the contractions become more and more intense. In fact, the only way to stop labor is to have the stimulus removed completely, which is the birth of the child. And once the baby's born, then those levels start to go back down again and labor ceases. It turns out all of the systems in the body are important for homeostasis. The nervous system is regulating and coordinating that activity. Cardiovascular system is transporting oxygen and nutrients to tissues, transporting waste away. It's also where your hormones are traveling through your body. Digestive system is supplying nutrients and also water for the body's cells, gets rid of non-digestible elements. Muscular system is producing the heat that maintains body temperature, protects and supports our internal organs. An integumentary system is really important to body temperature and protection. Lymphatic system helps maintain your blood volume, collects excess tissue fluid, returns it back to the cardiovascular system. It's even defending against disease. Your urinary system is how you balance your salt and your water, gets rid of nitrogenous wastes. Respiratory system supplies the blood with oxygen for tissues, cells, rids the body of carbon dioxide, helps regulate the acid base balance, and then ultimately the endocrine system, which is secreting the hormones which regulate and coordinate all kinds of activities in your body. And when we get to the endocrine system, we'll look at this far more deeply. But this gives us an overview of the two key mechanisms for maintaining homeostasis. Most of them are negative feedback. The output will eventually turn the system back off again, or positive feedback where you get a more and more intense response until the stimulus is actually removed. Thanks, guys.